Hello, and welcome to ChatDPS, where this week we're going to be focusing on data sovereignty. Now, data sovereignty seems to be a bit of a hot topic at the moment, and this came about because we're seeing more and more articles that are coming out all the time. There was one particular article that resonated, and it's called How I Moved My Digital Stack to Europe as a Monarchy. You can look it up on the web. It's very concise, and it actually breaks down into component parts why they've actually done this. But I thought it would be worthwhile having a chat about sort of like what's the significance of data sovereignty and what does it actually mean? So, Robert, I think there's several things that have come out of this article, and they seem to be consistent with pretty much every other article that we're reading at this moment in time. But can you give us a breakdown about why people might want to be moving away from American or generic American clouds?
I think it comes down to the amount of data that's being generated these days. And then you add in the LLMs, and huge amounts of data is being generated at the moment. And then you add in things like wanting to have control over that data, and perhaps some misalignment around values between, say, certain US-based companies and companies based outside of the US. So I think there's that sort of context, and that we've certainly seen, particularly Europe and the US, go head to head over data sovereignty and flouting GDPR over the years, a number of cases along those lines. And I think some of those concerns probably relate to things like when we look at the regulatory environment. There's the Cloud Act in the US. I think we've talked about that before. And there's the Patriot Act in the US. I think it's called the Freedom Act these days. Basically, Cloud Act looks at cross-border information and essentially enables US agencies to contact, let's say, an AWS, GCP, Azure, and access, say, data centers in another country, whether that's Europe, whether that's Australia, and access information for surveillance needs, requirements. The Patriot or Freedom Act is very much based on domestic surveillance, and again enables US agencies to contact these tech providers. And we've seen Apple as well being contacted around getting access to iPhone information, and the likes of Apple and Microsoft pushing back as well. But that's very much based on information stored in the US. So in one sense, the regulation covers everything. And I guess coming back to, why do you need to think about it? If you think about it, particularly when, if you think about the sort of providers that you may deal with, whether you're with Microsoft, you've got Apple products, social media, look at Facebook and other social media enterprises, the amount of changes to their terms and conditions, which are either expressly communicated to you or just happen. And then you find out about it through some article that's actually, AI learning's been enabled all of a sudden for your account.
So I remember when they added the health stuff when we were in COVID, and every Windows update, every Google update to a phone and every Apple update enabled health tracking and sending that data.
Yeah.
Just
so what you can see is let's be generous and say there's potentially a misalignment in values between what these US-based tech companies are doing and how they're changing their policies, they're changing their terms and conditions, and what, as I say, either an individual or an organization or a government agency might be going, you know what, maybe I don't agree with some of those policy changes, and maybe I'd like to have more control over the data that I'm generating. So whether I'm looking at data sovereignty or data residency, whatever it might be, maybe I want to have a little bit more control from a values-based kind of consideration.
That's a really good point. So, Adam Cunningham, I know that you've got some thoughts around what is data residency and what is data sovereignty. I mean, can you explain to the people what's the difference?
Yeah, I think it's important that everyone understands the definition of these words that are going around, because they're being used out of context a lot lately. So data residency is ultimately where my data physically sits. So, is it in Sydney, or is it in Belgium, or is it wherever? And we understand that every hyperscaler does that. You can pick it up with AWS, whatever you want to go with. And then there's data sovereignty. And data sovereignty, the word itself, has a much larger connotation, and not just that the data lives within Australia. but that it's governed by only Australian law for us, or if you're in the UK, by UK law, so on and so forth. So it's really important for us to understand that they're two different things. And when you look at the article that we were speaking about before, they talk about zoning a lot. This is another term that gets misconstrued by people. So zoning, it's important to understand that what it does is it keeps your data physically within a region for normal access. So your latency says low, your day-to-day compliance within residency requirements are satisfied. It's perfectly fine for a lot of workloads. But what zoning doesn't do is doesn't protect your data from compelled parent company jurisdiction. So in the case of the Cloud Act, AWS, for example, being able to pull that data from the US over those borders.
Yeah.
So the place where that's important is that once you start hitting data, which is what our government would consider as protected, you would need to have data sovereignty rules. And we use data sovereignty incorrect a lot. I've been guilty of this in the past, thinking sovereignty means within the country, not within the law.
Right. That's an interesting point. I'm about to throw a curly one to Adam Green, and I'm sorry for doing this to you, mate, but
All right.
so listen very carefully. I'll only say this once. So the ability to for cloud providers, we've been talking for years about the fact of it's lazy procurement to go out there and buy your compute and then your key management from the same cloud provider, because why would you? But also this whole concept of BYOkey, onshoring your data, doing a range of other things. There's got to be, maybe you don't have to change your cloud provider. Maybe you can do something with your own key. Is that potential?
So the Act says that they are able to. How much do you want me to get into here?
Go on, get into it.
Oh, we've all read the book, right? So, well, some of us have. So even if you have your data encrypted and you're using your own kind of storage there, we just mentioned Apple, and Apple's actually really good. Like, there's been cases where there's known terrorists, and the FBI have gone to Apple and said, "This guy's a known terrorist. We're prosecuting." The actual evidence is on the iPhone, and Apple says, we're not giving you access. And then the FBI comes back because they've gone to the zero-day broker market and they've found their way in, and they go, that's all right, we don't need you anymore. So there is always the case, if they want the data and it's for surveillance purposes, there will be a way to get the data. And then a lot of the vendors that we're talking about actually, for surveillance purposes, will be complicit with government requirements or government requests. Adam's tilting his head like my puppy dog does when an ambulance goes past, calling bullshit. I'm gonna let Adam step in too, because I know Adam works across a lot of borders and he might have a view on this as well.
What's interesting, I would just be very careful saying that it's good and then they don't give terrorist information over.
No, I wasn't saying it's good, but I guess the point was like, all of us, we're pretty good people. So it's reassuring for us that Apple is actually taking privacy and consumer privacy extremely seriously. And that's just an example of, well, the government's gone after the information, the vendor hasn't complied, so then they've found a way to get to it anyway.
Yeah, and hopefully that continues pace across the board, that companies take the privacy of their customers very seriously. The problem is, as these laws get passed, there's less and less room for a business to not comply. So the more these things happen, the jurisdiction, once the borders kind of dissolve on jurisdiction, it gets really hard.
And
I'm sure Robert can tell us how hard it would be for us to impose Australian will on Europe, for example.
Yeah. But we've seen, like, even in the intelligence game, we're starting to see that Europe are saying we actually want sovereign capability for intelligence. And I think part of that is because we saw, and we're not picking on a specific jurisdiction here, but we did see that the US dialed back their investment into information sharing and intelligence sharing. So then Europe had turned around and said, all right, well, we're not going to allow our intelligence. So they had Palantir was the example in this one, where they're like, we're not going to be beholden to the intelligence that comes out of a vendor where they're bringing the intelligence from a country that they're defunding it. So they've called for a new capability that they do out of region. And so it's a true sovereign capability.
Yeah.
That was a really bad attempt of me trying to speak like a politician and dance around what I was
Yeah.
trying to say.
I would like
Because
to get
Robert's on here, I'm really scared.
Yeah, you should be. I really would like to get an answer around this, sort of like bring your own key kind of thing. Can you actually make something sovereign by saying, right, I mean, Adam Cunningham, I mean, you're a global CISO. If you said, right, I want key management for Canada, I want key management for Algeria, and I want key management for my business that's sitting in, I don't know, the Philippines, can you actually achieve an outcome through that kind of method? Or is that just sort of like marketing bullshit as well?
Only for data at rest.
Only
So
data at
if,
rest.
so if I have Azure, for example, I can encrypt all the information that I have from a file repository or whatnot on Azure. And then if Microsoft were asked to give my data up to the American government, they wouldn't be able to decrypt it, or they'd have to go through the same process as a criminal would to decrypt it. However, the problem is, for the most part, when you're utilizing the cloud, you don't have data at rest. You're using live data. You're using databases. All of these things are turned on to start with. So it makes it very difficult for them to be, or not to be able to take it straight out of memory or directly off the machine while it's still running. So this is where you kind of stuck from that perspective. So you have to find a service that will work.
The residency argument and the sovereign argument remain. Yeah, they absolutely remain. Okay,
So I actually used to be the CISO of an organization that had a 3-key exchange, and unfortunately they're not around anymore. Nothing to do with me, but it was a 3-key exchange. So you had a key yourself, the vendor had a key, and then there was one in escrow. So the simple way of saying it is you have an A, a B, and a C key. So I, as the user, would have the A and the B key, and then the vendor would have the B and the C key. But we didn't have the full complement of keys. So we needed escrow to then come in with the full complement of keys so that we could do decryption. So it was actually, we were encrypted at rest, in transit, and when it hits the cloud. It was a really tricky user interface if you forgot anything. So if you changed anything, or if you forgot your password, and I actually activated the process myself as the size. I was like, all right, I've lost my password. And even so, I was testing to see how quickly I could just recover this stuff.
Yeah.
It was a 72-hour process to get my new keys cut. And there were like 3 different approval requirements. Even for me as a CISO, I still had to get approved from my own organization. Yeah. So that was actually well, you know me well. So that was actually a really neat way of doing it. So I wonder if there's anyone who's going to try to disrupt that kind of offering
moving
again.
into a post-quantum world, I suppose, and there's going to be all sorts of new checks and balances around all of that stuff. But I'd like to come back to Robert, actually. And when you started talking, Robert, you were talking about the fact, or we were sort of aiming this around the fact that it's not just hosting services that the Europeans have chosen to direct their change program to. They're also rewriting email and other core applications so that they can actually have something in-house. So it's not just that hosting stack, it's the application stack as well, is it not?
You mean Lotus Notes was ahead of its time?
Maybe.
It could come back?
Yeah, it could. It's all the less, and I think it's important to distinguish between the surveillance side of things, and it might be that most organizations say, you know what, I don't really care about that because it's not like we're doing anything nefarious, and so we don't care about the Cloud Act and the Patriot Act because in that sense, they're not doing anything bad. I don't care about that. However, if you bring it back to what these cloud providers are doing and the SaaS companies, and like if you went through that article we mentioned, and just take one off the top of the list, Google Analytics, and the guy makes the point, it's a free product, and it's a free product because you are the product. So if you've got concerns around these applications, these services, where, like I say, the values may not be aligned with your values, where the policies could change at any time. If you're dealing with these LLMs, OpenAI, Anthropic, if you're concerned about them changing the terms and conditions and the way that they use your data and use it for their own monetary and financial profit-taking purposes,
Some might
then
say nefarious reasons.
there you go. There you go. Then you should be. It's a case of, oh, look, it's convenient to use these LLMs, to use these infrastructure organizations. However, if you actually want to put the time into, I want to make a values-based decision, there are alternatives you can actually look at, and you can actually, transition across to. I think that's the key thing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking here, I mean, outside of the square a little bit, your recidivist argument from last week, Adam, I got it right this time. The main purpose for an awful lot of this is going to be around national security and protection, enhanced privacy and compliance. So, I mean, not all of us work in a highly regulated environment, so is it really that much of a bother? Intellectual property, business continuity and resilience, speed, latency, those are kind of like important things. Economic growth and innovation, and the point there, I think, is the fact that this whole point with economic growth and innovation is around the fact that there was a story going back, I remember, from a few years ago, where there used to be something like around about 30 different research institutes within the M25 in the UK. And after the innovation brought to them by the cloud and AWS in particular, there are now 0 innovation companies that reside within the M25. So are we kind of like heading down that road of, hey, look, you're giving up your right to innovate, you're giving up your right to research and development and doing, being responsible for your own thing. Is that just a natural conclusion for this?
That's an interesting. No. So
no one wants to get in trouble.
No. One thing that I will say on this one, right, is Australia actually has a really rich heritage in innovation and building things. If I use battery world, like we're the ones that have built the patents for all of the large battery, or some of the large battery enhancements that have happened throughout the world. We're just really bad at production because we've decided to get rid of that through our government's changes.
Unions.
What we do is, whatever it is, we basically build this innovation, we get a great idea, and then we outsource it to someone to build. And so we lose all of that capability every single time. We've spent the last 30, 40 years in Australia getting rid of that. You look at oil refineries, you look at all of these different places. We no longer produce. We just, we come up with ideas, we dig stuff out of the ground, we send it somewhere else and we buy it back later. And that has been our strategy for the last 40 years. Not to get political, because we've had many different governments from both sides in that time frame, and they've all done exactly the same thing from there. I don't think the innovation idea will stop here, but the problem is all we're doing is we're doing the research for other people to profit.
It's like we have a fairly unfair share of solar engineers, and obviously because they couldn't do anything, they couldn't productize it well enough here because of manufacturing costs. They've all shot off around the world. But I wonder if the Australian government's going to pay a lot more attention and take more ownership over our data now that apparently they're going to own 47% of all of our companies. They're our business partners now.
Oh, dear.
So we did go there, did we?
Come on, it's been in the news all bloody 20 plus 48 hours.
Taxation and yeah, I mean, I get where you're going with it, but I mean, and it's an argument that's been put forward. But I think the bigger one than that is this capital gains tax arrangement, isn't it? Yeah, where you're going.
Yeah. And it was about the the family trust taxation and stuff like that as well. So yeah, but I was just chucking that in because it's so. I've seen so many hilarious AI generated memes of Albo on stage next to people. And they're like, great to have my new partner with me every time I step up on stage or every time I go see a client. So just adding in a bit of spice.
Well, maybe we should do one on taxation at some point, because it does have an impact upon how, who we work for, how we work within those organizations, I guess. And
we might need to bring someone on who knows about taxation.
Knows about tax.
Yeah, that would be good. I did a deep dive into the budget, and I will say there is 20% of the budget is honestly really interesting and innovative, and 80% of the budget is the same crap we've seen for
the same sledgehammer, the crack a nut.
It's just different spin. It depends which media agency picked it up.
Unlike last budget, which was all the same, there's 20% really interesting new stuff here.
So yeah, so there's been a shift. Okay, guys. Well, look, I think that we've done the arguments to pieces. Is there any last thoughts around the sovereignty versus residency debate that we've got here? I mean, Adam Green, I'll start with you. Are there any points that sort of like just to finish up on?
Yeah, I will say, like, we've gone very heavily down the SaaS path. So there seems to be a lot of hyper focus on the hyperscalers.
Yeah,
They're like our SaaS providers for CRM, ERP, our financials, our financial invoicing and everything we do there.
yeah.
Our multi-factor authentication provider, our email provider. Like, it is amazing how much SaaS we are using as organizations. I think it's a little unfair to just focus in on the hyperscalers, but it does make for good vendor bashing. But I think there's definitely a re-architecture consideration with this in mind and with sovereignty in mind. And I just think if we start to chip them off one by one, the old saying, how do you eat an elephant?
One piece at a time.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out how to eat one, so I haven't tried. But no, if we try it one architectural element at a time, and then just de-risk ourselves from that loss of sovereignty, I think that's going to be the flavor of the next few years. That's if we can all keep up with how fast everything's moving with agentic.
Okay, Adam Cunningham, any last thoughts from you, my friend?
I'll just leave with the statement to clarify a little bit around residency and sovereignty to help people not confuse them. Residency is your postcode. Sovereignty is your passport. And it's important to understand the difference between the two of those things.
Okay, and Mr. Feldman.
I think let's watch what Europe does because they're doing some interesting things around breaking that link between the US and Europe in terms of these sorts of providers. I think politically it's probably difficult for the Australian government because they're so in bed with the US when you look at things like AUKUS. But that doesn't mean that a private company can't look at what is happening in Europe and take some of the lead from there in making their own decisions as well. So let's see how it plays out. Let's look at what the alternatives are. Let's see them getting proved as good alternatives to some of these SaaS products that are out there. And I think it's a case of don't just rely on a convenient solution. Actually, make a judgment call based on values as well. Let's see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on this are around post-quantum compute and what have you. We're going to be led by technology rather than the bureaucracy this time around again. There's going to be no future thought in it. We've been thinking about GDPR for such a long time now, and it's still not come to Australia, which is leaving us way behind. And the one thing I am concerned, or one thing I'm hoping will actually happen, is somebody might take this idea of safe harbor a little bit more seriously. It's been enacted within Europe, with borders over there, and it's something I think we could be really, really good at. And we're building data centers at a rate of knots at this moment in time without actually consideration for the electrical grid or any of the other pieces. So that's my thought for the day, and maybe it's one that we should be thinking of. Gentlemen, thank you so much. That was ChatDPS for this week, and really appreciate everybody's time and effort.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.